Hi. Today is the lecture about the two-party system. Why is it that we only have two parties in this country when we clearly have more diversity in our political thought than that? I'd like to start with this hypothetical question here. I'm a big Cavs fan. The question is, should I waste my time rooting for them, even though they have no chance of winning the title this year, or really any year for the next decade and a half minimum? Um, we start this off as kind of a hypothetical for our parties and elections question, but I usually get two different responses here. One would be, well, of course you root for them. They're your team, so you support them no matter what. That's part of being a fan. The other side says, well, you can root for them now, but when the season's over, you're going to have to pick somebody who's actually in the finals, and so that clearly won't be the Cavs. Um, we set that up to address this question here. So let's imagine I'm a libertarian. And so I really like Gary Johnson. He's the guy who ran on the Libertarian Party ticket in 2016. Gary Johnson's a constitutional kind of a guy. So am I. His biggest issues are economic stuff, taxes, business regulations. Those are the things he's primarily focused on. And so for this hypothetical, I don't like Donald Trump, but I also really do not like Bernie Sanders. And so the question is, when the presidential election rolls around in November, should I vote for Gary Johnson? Should I vote for Gary Johnson? Um, it would seem like, based on surveys about party affiliation, there's a lot of people like me. There's a lot of Gary Johnson supporters out there, or at least people who don't like either of the two major parties. You look at these stats here, the Republicans are at about 30% support, Democrats about the same, and the independents are probably at 40%. So it seems like nobody's really in love with either of the two main parties. So hypothetically, a lot of people should be like me and should be willing to vote for Gary Johnson. And yet, when you look at the results from the 2016 election, sure didn't seem like many were on our side. So, question for today is, well, why is that? If most of us are so dissatisfied with the two major parties, why aren't we voting for somebody else? So let's set up a hypothetical situation for this year. So you had six different Democrats who were reasonably running. Let's just assume hypothetically that Bernie Sanders is our winner. He's going to have a come from behind victory here and end up beating Biden out, probably because Biden at this point is having difficulty stringing together more than about 4 or 5 words to form a complete sentence. But let's also assume that, okay, Bloomberg has dropped out, but he plans on running in November as a third-party candidate. He certainly got enough money to do it. He spent $500 million on ads, and he's worth significantly more than that. So let's assume that our election will go like this. Trump versus Sanders versus Bloomberg in the primaries. Would that really happen? I think based on what we saw from the 2016 election, the answer is no, he won't run. And our question is, why not? He certainly wasn't popular in the primaries, but he also didn't qualify for many of the ballots. And he might seem like a reasonable alternative come November, but I would be willing to bet that he won't run. And so let's figure out why not. Imagine here we've got a congressional race, okay? Somebody who's running to be in the U.S. House of Representatives, and this is what our district looks like. Okay, we have a district with 21,000 Republican voters and 20,000 Democrat voters. We're going to assume for this hypothetical that 5 different candidates are running. And so this is how the results break down. You've got, of those 21,000 conservative voters, they can split their vote 3 different ways. Those 20,000 Democrat voters can split their vote amongst 2 candidates. And so looking at these results, the winner would be Mary Moderate on the Democrat side. And so how is it that the Democrat candidate is winning, despite the fact that there are fewer Democrats in the district? Well, it's easy. They had fewer candidates to split votes between. And so you take this election and fast forward it 2 years later. What will change? Well, because conservatives don't want to lose the election to Democrats when they have more people, then clearly voters will have to make a choice here. And so the voters who have to make a choice are the supporters of Sam Centrist, the creatively named Sam Centrist. And so they will probably throw their weight behind the most popular candidate, Pete Populist. Fast forward 2 years later, what are Democrat voters going to have to do? The same thing. They're going to have to make a choice. And so the people who supported Simon's socialists will now be throwing their weight behind Mary moderates so that they can beat the Republicans. Fast forward 2 years later, and you get the same thing. And so this is roughly why we only ever have two parties in this country. It doesn't make sense. Voters are smart enough to realize that when they split up their votes, they have a worse chance of winning the election, and so they throw their weight behind the most popular candidate on their side. The concept is known as splitting the vote, and it's basically the effect of third-party candidates running in an election. You imagine a hypothetical election where you have 11,000 conservative-leaning voters and 10,000 Democrat-leaning voters. The independent in our situation is slightly conservative-leaning, and so votes are divided there. And what do you know? The Democrat candidate wins despite having fewer total voters in the district. And so voters aren't stupid. The next time an election rolls around, they won't support that candidate who has no chance. They'll throw their weight behind the most popular one who's closest to their belief system, and there you have it, a two-party system. And so here's why maybe this hypothetical isn't the best example, because there's a difference between rooting for the Cavs and voting for Gary Johnson. When I root for the Cavs, I'm not actively helping the Milwaukee Bucks win the title. I'm just rooting for a loser team. But when I vote for Gary Johnson, I'm actually helping to elect a candidate that I don't like. I'm making it more likely, by voting for Gary Johnson, I'm making it more likely that Bernie Sanders will win the election. And he's the furthest from my political beliefs. How is it that I'm actually helping him win? Well, if Gary Johnson wasn't in the election, I would have voted, in my hypothetical, for Donald Trump. And so if my votes would have gone to him, we would have had enough to win the election. But because I vote for my third-party candidate, it's not. People will say it's wasting a vote to vote for a third-party candidate. I think it's more than wasting a vote. Wasting a vote implies that it's useless. The vote has power. It actually keeps somebody you sort of like from winning and actively helps somebody you dislike. It helps them to win the election. And so one of the things that our system forces voters to do is something kind of stupid. It doesn't allow us to vote for candidates that we like. It asks us to play guessing games about what other voters are going to do. And this clip's from the 2016 primaries, but I like it, and I think it helps explain this concept at least a little bit, assuming I could play it.
BernieSanders.com. Check it out. It's a mess.
Listen, my teens and my 20-somethings, I get it. He's cool. He's the song of the summer. He's Trap Queen by Fetty Wap. But I'm the birthday song, guys, and you're going to be singing me until the day you die.
All right, so what's the idea? It's simply this. What do voters want to do? Well, they want to vote for Bernie Sanders, but can they? No, because he's probably the long shot to win, and so you have to throw your weight behind Hillary Clinton. I mean, at least that was the the conventional wisdom in 2016. The guy who you really like doesn't have much of a chance to win, so you're going to have to support somebody that you don't like, who isn't all that stellar of a candidate, just to give your team a better chance. And so political scientists call this strategic voting, and strategic voting is basically this. Voters identify, who do I hate in this election? Figure out who has the best chance to beat the guy I hate, and then vote for them. It doesn't mean that I like that candidate. I mean, that's one of the problems with our method of voting. You aren't necessarily expressing a positive preference when you cast a vote. It may be that you're simply voting against a candidate that you hate. And when you think about it, it's kind of a stupid way to conduct elections, right? Like, the whole idea behind an election is that you're choosing somebody that you like and whose ideas you support so that those policies can be enacted. But our system doesn't let us vote for somebody that we like. It forces us to play this stupid game of voting against people we hate. I've sort of used the analogy of a marriage proposal. Will you marry me? Oh, because you love me? Well, no. You see, there were 4 or 5 other girls I was thinking about asking, but you just seemed the most likely to say yes. That's what our political system forces us to do. Now, I thought this tweet was pretty good at capturing that same thing. Now, it's a little bit different for a primary than in a general election. In a primary, voting for somebody fringe doesn't help the other party win. But it is this idea that people will say, well, listen, just vote for the guy you like. Maybe other voters feel the same way. No, no, you can't do that. If you vote for somebody who doesn't have a chance of winning, you're actively helping the person you like least win the election, at least as it relates to a general election. And so the term political scientists give to this is called Duverger's law. We don't have a lot of laws in political science because you're dealing with human behavior and it's difficult to predict. But this one has been consistently true. The idea is this: when you conduct your elections the way we do, with single winners, and that winner doesn't need a majority of the votes, they simply need more than every other candidate. Okay, so those are our 2 pieces. A single winner who only needs a plurality of the votes, more than everybody else. If you give that system enough time, it will always result in a 2-party system. Because voters aren't stupid. And so they don't want somebody they hate to win, so they have to throw their weight behind whoever has the best chance to beat that person rather than who they like best. I won't show you this video in full right now. I'll let you watch this on your own. But I think this guy does a really, really good job of explaining how all this stuff works. So that's it for today. If you have any questions on Duverger's law and why it is that we only have 2 parties, again, it has to deal with the way we conduct our elections, not with finance or not with letting them in the debates. In fact, the more popular a third-party candidate is, the more we will just see this effect. The idea that voting for them actively helps somebody I don't like win the election. So tomorrow I'll post a couple of videos that take a look at how we could change our voting system to produce some more third parties to be viable, like there are in most other Western democracies. And so, till then, have a good one.